Death. Our ideas about death define how we live our lives. Dag Hammarskjöld. The fear of death in you or others is a sometimes hidden, potent force affecting personality and behavior in strange and varied ways. To compensate for this fear, some will seek to control others, objects, money, the appearance of youth, etc., in vain, hollow attempts to stave off the fragility of corporeal incarnation. The fear of death can warp the perception of time, body, money, property, ambition, relationship, power, and many other human attributes. Western culture is in denial of death and encourages us to think we can cheat it through dieting, plastic surgery, cosmetics, exercise, romantic adventures, exciting purchases, and uploading our consciousness into quantum computers. The fear of death seems to be located in the ego, whereas what Jung called the self, aware that it did not begin at birth, perceives death as a change, not annihilation. The ego may view death as an emergency, but for the self, it may be an emergence. Death is a guaranteed portal, an event horizon, an opportunity to step across the threshold. We cheat ourselves by viewing it negatively or denying its inexorable approach. Tolkien called the desire to avoid aging premature immortality, and in his mythology, humans were considered more blessed than elves because their corporeal incarnation had a definite time limit. I can't cheat death, nor would I want to. And while mentioning Tolkien's attitude toward death, let me point out that I think it's chapter 3, which is of this book, which is free on the website, is called The Singularity Archetype and Near-Death Experience. And I'll put a link in this card. But you can find this book free on the homepage of the site. Also get a physical copy on Amazon. And then there is so much about a strange relationship to death, and that death is not what you might have been led to think it is in my 45-year project, Parallel Journeys. Free on the website. Physical book, Audible, I think the best version, read by me, Kindle, all available on Amazon. Death is I guess I read that. When I was very young, my fear of death was quite intense, but numerous out-of-body experiences caused the fear to vanish. I directly experienced that not only could my awareness exist outside of my body, it could also be incredibly enhanced by the separation. The view of death as possible annihilation was replaced by a deep intuition of death as an orgasmic portal. Many people brought up in a culture of fundamentalist materialism, also called scientism, as compared to science, have a bleak view of death. One friend described it as, it's just lights out and that's it. That friend seemed to pursue physical fitness as a hedge against the approach of death. A careful study of near-death experience findings should be enough to convince an open-minded skeptic that death is an event horizon, not a pit of oblivion. And besides my work, a good starting place could be renowned journalist Leslie Kean's book, Surviving Death. The journalist investigates evidence of an afterlife, as well as the Netflix series that she put together, which has different but amazing content, called Surviving Death. Also, Pim Van Lummel's book, Consciousness Beyond Life, for the scientifically minded, is extremely powerful. The position of neurological materialism, the belief that consciousness is an epiphenomenon or secondary effect of biochemical process in the brain, is resoundingly and definitively contradicted by NDE findings. Do your homework if you're a neurological materialist and don't buy that. Consciousness does not reside in the brain, and electrical activity in the brain is not a prerequisite for consciousness. And I give some examples of NDE evidence below. The fear of death is often a function of a life not fully lived, of aliveness rejected or neglected in the present. The fear of death may be a fear of the comprehensive life review that so many near-death experiencers report, a fear of being held accountable for a life not fully lived, of a life misused, and of harm done to others. Some visionaries say that the soul may travel on from death, but this survival is not guaranteed. Those who have led dissolute, fragmented lives may not have enough of a center to hold together and may disintegrate at death. How can we be sure? But this is what a number of them have said. To paraphrase FDR, there is nothing to fear but the fear of death itself. Depending on this card's position, the death element may mean that you are in a phase where an aspect of your old identity may need to die and be reborn. Death means transformation. You may be experiencing some form of necessary ego death. What the ego views as emergency, for the soul may be an emergence. And then here is something that the Roman poet Ovid wrote in Metamorphoses. Then death, so called, is but old matter dressed in some new figure and a varied vest. Thus all things are but altered, nothing dies, and here and there the unbodied spirit flies. When the clock strikes me, the powers of being will prevail over the powers that be. Saul Williams. And now here is my future epitaph, which has been inscribed in my official estate documents. On this date, fill in the blank, Jonathan Zapp won his long battle with corporeality by dying. And let's see, there might be some more things here at the bottom of this card. There are some links, of course, to follow up on. Let's see. Well, check out some of those links. The following example of NDE evidence is far from the most impressive, but is chosen because of the arch conservatism of its source, the National Geographic, an organization known for its attempts to debunk paranormal claims. Some transcribed excerpts from the National Geographic documentary The Moment of Death follow. Al Sullivan, a man who has survived a multiple bypass operation, relates, "In the operating room, here comes Dr. Takata, whom I had never laid eyes on before. He introduced himself. 'Hi, Mr. Sullivan. Good afternoon. I am Dr. Takata.' And he told me what he was going to do. We are going to take veins from the legs and take arteries also from the chest wall and probably do 4 or 5 bypasses for you." And I'm listening, and all of a sudden I don't have to listen to him telling me. I can see what he is doing because I found I wasn't there to listen anymore. I just left my body. I assume this is when the general anesthesia would have kicked in, and it sounds like he's having an out-of-body experience, and watched. And now, meanwhile, I don't know if it's made clear here, but his eyes are taped shut as a common practice in surgeries. I can see, but I'm looking down at them. It used to be me, but it wasn't me because the real me is up here watching. That's when they started putting stuff over my eyes and all kinds of drapes and blankets all around me. And I could see Dr. Takata and his people. And this is another thing. I could see through the operating table and me, and I could see what kind of boots he had on. At one point he stepped back, the surgeon stepped back, and it looked like he was flapping his arms. And I thought, what in the world is he doing that for? Al continues. He was orchestrating, do this. So what he's saying is that Dr. Takata going like this with his elbows, with his hands tucked in. And it seemed very weird. He would do this and do that, and it seemed very foreign to me what he was doing. Al demonstrates Dr. Takata's strange movements, his hands to the sides of his chest, elbows bent, twisting around and pointing with his elbows as he gives commands. Dr. Anthony F. Lazula, MD, a cardiologist at Hartford Hospital, explains, Dr. Takata, when he's not operating and trying not to contaminate his hands, will put his hands close to his chest and point with his elbow. And this is something completely idiosyncratic to this one surgeon. Dr. LaSala, Al Sullivan would not know of this peculiar behavior of Dr. Takata. I did not tell him that. Dr. Takata, I cannot explain how he saw these things under this complete sleep of anesthesia. Dr. LaSala, even if he was conscious, it would be impossible for Al to see Dr. Takata's stance or arm movement because Al was behind a drape that blocks the vision of the patient, and his eyes, the patient's eyes, in other words, were taped shut. And for an even more impressive example, see, it's actually chapter 3. The link is given there, called Near Death Experience and the Singularity Archetype. And read about the Pam Reynolds case, because that's one of the most impressive cases of evidential near-death experience. Death may not be what you think it is, and I strongly, strongly advise you, if you've been hoodwinked by the fundamentalists, materialists, into believing it's just lights out and that's it, to do some homework. Dr. Kenneth Ring, professor emeritus at the University of Connecticut, a pioneering near-death experience researcher, now deceased himself, but he did studies that showed, and I think also Pim Van Lommel did studies that showed that even just reading about near-death experiences has a kind of viral effect. It produces some of the profound changes that we see in people who have near-death experiences, and that get stronger through time, because so much of the testimony is so incredibly authentic that it pierces through some of these materialist notions about death. And remember, no other generation, we don't need to read, we can, they're great, but Tibetan or Egyptian books of the dead, or see what ancient documents said, because no other generation has known as much about death as we do, for a couple of reasons. One, the field of near-death experience research, pioneered by Dr. Raymond Moody in the 70s. And two, resuscitation technology, which even just in the last few years has meant that we can bring back people who meet every clinical definition of death, that have been dead far longer than we ever could have brought them back before, so that if the Titanic happened today, they believe they could send boats out even hours later, because the cold water would have preserved the brain and restarted a large number of those people. So we have much more evidence and knowledge about death than any other culture or human group, and I strongly encourage you to take advantage of that.